Before even the work from home concept ever existed, you were the one who probably implemented it. Because at the end of the day, sales is about having a human connection.
Is how to not make AI make you dumb.
What is the biggest mistake SDR make in appointment setting and how they can fix it? What is the maximum number of follow-ups a sales guy should do?
Hello and welcome. Thank you for tuning into Data Demands podcast, where we connect the dots between MarTech and marketing landscape. Stay tuned to MarTech 360 as we explore key strategies for your marketing success.
Hello and welcome to MarTech 360 podcast, where we decode the complexities of marketing technology with industry's top experts. MarTech 360 is more than just a media platform. It's a community of over 2 million marketing professionals who rely on us for expert analysis, market intelligence, and actionable advice. My name is Samarth, and I work with Data Demand. If you're fascinated by the intersection of technology, sales, and marketing, you are in the right place. This episode is a must listen. Today, we have an incredible guest with us, David Kreiger, founder and president of SalesRoads. Under his leadership, SalesRoads has built over 500 SDR teams, generated more than 100,000 sales opportunities, and earned a spot in INC 5000 list 3 times. David is recognized as an expert in outbound sales, a contributor to the Entrepreneur magazine, and a firm believer in the power of human connections in sales. David, welcome to the show. We are excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Samarth. It's great to be here.
Awesome. David, every company, or rather say, every company has a story. Before we get into the nitty-gritties of the sales strategies, let's rewind a bit. I'll take you down to the memory lane. Starting a business is never easy. And I imagine SalesRoads has its own set of unique challenges. What inspired you to start SalesRoads? What opportunity did you see? And what was the biggest challenge you faced in the early years?
Yeah, so the history of SalesRoads goes back to 2005. I was in business school and was trying desperately over the first 2 years of business school to try not to have to get a job out of business school. So I wanted to try to start my own company. And so I was trying to think of different ideas for a company. And prior to going to business school, I had worked at a startup and built their whole inside sales team. And I loved doing that. I thought it was an amazing endeavor, and I was pretty good at it. So I was thinking a little bit around that concept, and I started reading about the idea of distributed call centers, so people working out of their home office. This is back in 2005, and it was mainly done for inbound type of work. But I just loved the concept because I had seen the challenges of really recruiting really good salespeople, and the concept of being able to recruit the best salespeople wherever they live was really compelling. And so I started thinking about that idea, and then I had a few friends who had been in the military, and they were telling me about some of the challenges that their spouses had finding work as they were deployed every few years to a different location. And so originally, and then I actually tried to wrap that into the concept, and we originally started by recruiting military spouses to work out of their home. And that was the original idea for SalesRoads. So a work from home company recruiting military spouses. But when I launched the company, it was amazing. It was just an unmet need in the marketplace. Really great people wanted to be able to work from home. Remember, this is not 2020. This is 2000 now, at this point, 2007. So we eventually opened up recruiting to everybody, and that was what built SalesRoads. So it was, we were originally, it's in our DNA from day one. We were in a work from home company, and the initial challenge was really just convincing our clients that work from home worked, that it was good, that you got better people, especially that day and age, working from home. And so that's how our journey began.
Right. Wow. Interesting. Before even the work from home concept ever existed, you were the one who probably implemented it.
Yeah, we were one of the first. So we're definitely ahead of the curve on that one.
Amazing. That's really insightful. And it's fascinating to hear, how it started and the lessons learned all the way along. as the company grew, and I imagine, there came a point where you have to, shift from being a primary salesperson to building a team that could sell as effectively as you sold. I'm sure that transition wasn't, easy. And at the same time, one of the biggest struggle for founders is knowing when and how to step away from doing sales themselves. Many founders are great in selling because they deeply believe in the product, but transitioning from a main sales guy to leading a team, that's a whole different skill set. How can founders leverage from the experience, since you have 2005, you have created, worked, managed, and created a diverse team working from different locations. How can founders effectively manage this transition? From building themselves to empowering the sales team without losing that personal touch.
Yeah. So I think first of all, you never completely step away from sales. I mean, sales is always part of what you have to do as a founder. You're not the one doing it necessarily on a day-to-day basis, but it's got to be a mindset. That is part of your job as you meet people, as you help introduce them to your organization. But I think the key part for founders, and the crux of your question, is really the day-to-day sales, right? When you're first starting, you are doing all the day-to-day sales. You are handling the leads. You're doing potentially your own outbound, all those types of things. And I actually think that's really critical to do, because you need to really understand your market. You need to understand the sales process. You need to understand what works. And the thing I think that folks forget as they're doing it, and they try to transition, and when they try to transition, they might fail at it, is you got to create processes around what you're doing, and you got to document those processes. So you start by, iterating, you start by figuring it out, but then document everything. And then once you've documented everything, then you can train on those processes, you can coach on those processes. And again, until you grow to a certain size and you have managers and things like that, you can't abdicate it. So if you hire your first salesperson, don't just think they're going to step into your role and just succeed. You've got to really train them. You've got to really coach them. You've got to be there side by side so that they can then take over for you.
Right. Can I say it's an act of balance between scale and personalization? And it's, definitely a challenge. Can I say that?
Yeah, sure.
You scale and you have to, it's more of the personalization and balancing act that you do. And I completely agree that, it's about documenting, putting across your thought process in step-by-step process for people to follow, because that's the tested method and it had worked in the past. So I'm sure, more people can replicate it. It will work much better at a faster scale. The biggest problem with any sales strategy, has been the outbound prospecting, especially when it comes to cold calling. I'm just changing the gear and, slightly getting into the zone of, the entire, sales. Cold calling is one thing that most salespeople either love it or hate it. And, let's be honest, it's not getting any easier as of today. Inboxes are flooded. LinkedIn messages go unread. Nobody wants to pick up an unknown number, but some SDRs still manage to break through that noise. If you had to train a team of SDRs to improve their cold call success rate immediately today, what is the first thing you would teach them?
Yeah, so I'm going to look at that question just slightly differently. Because I think that there isn't one thing. And that's what makes cold calling such a challenge. It makes it fascinating. And I think if you just focus on coming in and helping teams address objections, on helping them to listen better, on helping them to be more tenacious, I don't think it's necessarily going to work. I think what you really have to do, if I were to come in and train somebody's SDR team, you've got to really take a look at the whole process. And because there's so many things, if it's not working, that could be broken. And if you address just one thing or the wrong thing, it's not gonna get fixed. So you really have to look at it holistically. Are people targeting the right prospects? A lot of times they aren't. Are they understanding who those prospects are and what their pains are. A lot of times they're not. If they understand it, are they able to create an approach that actually addresses those pains in a way that is understandable in a cold call, right? You don't have a 30-minute discovery to really do it. That's the challenge. You've got to be much more concise. You've got to be much more precise. And if they have created that, are the SDRs then really understanding that, or just reading off of the script? Are they able to then think on their feet and ask the right types of questions? Are they able to build rapport in that small amount of time? And so there's not one silver bullet in this game. And so really you have to look at it holistically and try to understand where the process is broken, what's not working, and then address that.
Right. And, more to do is with the, the character of the sales guy that he or she is made up of, how strong they are individually also defines how actionable or simple or effective the process is. Because at the end of the day, sales is about having a human connection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. At the end of the day, it is listen, this is a human to human sale, at least as of right now. We'll see what the future brings us here. But when you can tap into that human connection, this is also, I know we might get into some of that, but and you're competing against AI, that is where you can stand out. If you can really understand that person, if you can relate to that person, if you can empathize with that person, even in a cold call, and I know that's hard, but that's where the magic happens.
Oh, absolutely. I love it. I love it the way that you have simplified it. It's simple, actionable, human touch, listen more, try to help. And, if you try to help, probably you will build trust, and, trust will lead to transaction. I mean, though it takes longer time, that's the whole idea. On that note, earlier it was only few of the, channels of sales, but today we have, the sales channels are becoming overcrowded. Let's say it's about standing out. We have LinkedIn, we have all the email marketing tools, we have, phone calls, the messaging services. I have realized that buyers have become more resistant than ever. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, 100%. I think that people are inundated. People are busy. People are, flooded in all the different channels that you talked about. And so I think it is harder than ever. I also think it's always been hard. We're always competing for people's attention, and definitely there are more people competing for folks' attentions. But I think there's also, because there's so much clutter, there's also opportunity, because the folks who can really use some of the amazing tools that are out there to be more relevant, to be hyper relevant to prospects, can help them break through a lot of this generic noise. But yes, to your point, it is definitely a challenge. It's not easy, and that's part of the challenge or fun of this business.
Absolutely. And what would be the key to standing out in this crowded market? I know you talked about using tools, but what would be, as a sales guy, what would be your go-to aspect in terms of standing out?
Yeah, so we can look at this both from an SDR go to market perspective, and then just the whole sales side of things, which includes go to market. But I think being hyper relevant and hyper targeted is really, really important. And the tools to be able to do it these days are just phenomenal. And without tremendous amounts of research like you had to do in the past. And that's where I think AI really does come into play in go-to-market right now, is being able to really find the right types of prospects who are relevant to your business, and you can therefore be relevant to them. And so I think that's the really, through cold outreach, that's the magic and really where you have to focus your time and energies. And then through that whole process, and for salespeople in general, but also for SDRs, is just being helpful, right? And that's not just even in what you're doing in the service you're providing, but just as you see people post things on LinkedIn that they're looking for advice on something or looking for help on something, do that. Those are opportunities. Post those things, help them out, and then it comes back to you, and that's how you build those personal connections in sales, and that's really super powerful.
True. Wow, that's an interesting take. And I completely agree with the AI is changing the way sales for better, I would say. And probably if you're not using it, you are making things worse for yourself. Because it's a great tool. It's a great tool, helps you to give a different level of perspective, helps you understand, what could be the possibilities of a customer pain area, and really fixes the product side as well. And I think it's a future. So, fast forward 2030, what do you think would be the biggest challenge sales team would face? It's about,
Yes.
down the line, yeah.
So I agree with everything you just said with AI. I think that it is an amazingly powerful tool. I mean, we use it at SalesRoads in a lot of different areas. And, if you're not using it, you are definitely going to get left behind. Here's the challenge, I think, for leaders these days in their organization. And I think the biggest challenge we'll see in 2030, and I've been starting to think about this a lot, both for myself, for my team, for my kids, because I have really been pushing AI a lot, is how to not make AI make you dumb. And I think that if AI is used in the wrong way, even though it might in the short term make you come up with some better types of things, better outputs, sometimes I don't even think that that's the case when you're using it in the wrong way. But over time, you're going to dull those skills that are really, really important. I think that if you outsource your thinking to AI, if you outsource all your writing to AI, where you don't maybe write the first draft, or at least you don't do the heavy editing, you are going to lose this critical skills, and we'll get to a point in 2030 where definitely AI is going to replace us because we're not able to do even just some of the fundamental things of thinking. And so I think it is really important to, for instance, if you're reading a book, instead of using AI to summarize that book, to read the book and then brainstorm with AI, talk about the book, talk about it with the author, right? Really go deeper in a way that you couldn't before with AI, instead of going more shallow in a way that you couldn't have done with AI.
That's pure wisdom. That's pure wisdom, I would say, because I completely agree with what you have said. People these days, they heavily rely on AI without even developing their own thought process. Probably tell a particular application to write an email for them. Tell them how do I respond to this email. But what is happening is, I usually talk about this within our sales team as well. That all right, you wouldn't have that tool while you are on the call with the prospect, wherein you really need to answer a rebuttal. That is going to make it very difficult. So the thinking, the thought process, the muscle memory will go for a toss if people don't use it. And like I said before, it's amazing to use it in your favor, but when you have an idea, and whatever you said in last 2 minutes, it is pure wisdom, David. Super excited about that the level of the authenticity that you spoke with. Is amazing. And I would say that it's a very balanced perspective. AI is a double-edged sword, and sales team needs to be use it in a very strategic manner and learn how to use them.
Yeah, and I think people are really they always look, especially in sales, but I think in life, they look for a silver bullet. They look for the easy button. And usually that will fail, at least in the long term. And AI is no different. It feels like an easy button because it will write your emails, because it will summarize, it will do, and actually, I think the research part is good as long as you read, do huge amounts of research, and that is a great test for AI. But there is never an easy button in life and in sales, and there's always negative repercussions on it. So I think we do really need to think, and it's one of the things that, as I mentioned at the beginning, I really am trying to think is how do I empower my team to use these tools while not making all of us dumb? And I think it's something we're going to be struggling with for years to come.
No, I completely agree. And, I remember within our conversation, you said, you guys, the team, your team, SDRs are, really working well with the tools. You mind sharing few tools that you and your team use?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. We would love to hear those, what tools you guys use.
Yeah, so the biggest go-to-market tool that I think is amazing is Clay.com. And so it is a tool that both helps build lead lists, but more, it's almost like a platform. So that for instance, before we would just pull things from Zoom, or we have a number of different tools, and you're limited to industries, to employee size, to things like that. But a lot of times that's not a great way to build lead lists. I mean, I'll give a very simple example. If you are a tech company that's trying to call into managed service providers, right, MSPs, there's no select for MSPs, right? They're under technology. And so back in the day, we either would have to have a team that's researching those and trying to look at the websites and figure out, is this an MSP? Is this a tech provider? All these types of things. Or worse, you'd have to have the SDRs call through it. And, that's a really inefficient use of their time, or they do a little pre-call research. Now we program agents through Clay. We'll create a basic list, and then we prompt it to go to the website of the company on the list and determine whether they're an MSP, right? So we replicate that research process through an AI agent. So Clay.com allows for that. You can plug in any of the AI tools that you use, whether it's OpenAI, whether it's Claude, whatever it might be, and then you can do the prompting right in that platform and then create those agents to do all that research. And so that's been very powerful for us, for our clients, because it can be hyper-targeted and hyper-efficient.
Awesome. I'm sure it's certainly making buzz at your teams. Hence you spoke so well about Clay.com. I'm going to have a look at it, and probably I'll take your advice. And anybody who's listening to this, make sure what David mentioned. Try searching, and if it's helping him, I'm sure it will help you as well. Super good. All right. So while we are talking about all the sales and sales strategy, and appointment setting has always been a very questionable, statement, and we have all gone through that road. Getting someone to say yes in a meeting is certainly a win, but how do you ensure that they actually show up? We all have ghosted before, and I think that's one of the most frustrating part for an outbound sales or any salesperson. In relation to that, what is the biggest mistake SDR make in appointment setting, and how they can fix it?
Yeah, I think it's really rushing to book the meeting, and that's the goal of the process, is booking the meeting, versus building value in the meeting. And I think if we all look back to sales meetings we've taken, right? There's ones that we take, and sometimes it's on our calendar. I'm like, why am I going to this meeting again? If something else comes up, right, that's going to take priority. Whereas I think we've also had meetings where we're looking forward to that meeting, right? We're excited to see what this can do for us, and that's where the magic happens. That's what you have to get to. You've got to get people excited in the value of them taking that 30 minutes, of them taking that 45 minutes and wanting to be in that meeting. And a lot of times you rush that. You rush that step and trying to go to the close and trying to get things closed. And if you do that, there's a much higher chance that meeting is going to get canceled, it's going to be a no-show, or it's just a waste of the salesperson and the prospect's time, because they end up on the meeting and they're like, why am I here? I can't even remember why. It's on my calendar.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and that's the most common issue. It's all hurrying in, rushing in, trying to book a 30-minute slot without even understanding what the prospect really wants. that creates, and you mentioned that this is how we can fix it. It's a common issue, and I'm sure we all will find this super helpful. Be active, listen to them, don't rush in, understand their need, address their need, and probably they will give you time. If you don't follow the set process, probably the chances are you're gonna end up crying or being ghosted. All right. Okay. And while we talk about the appointment generation, not all leads which are created are equal. Some prospects are just tire kickers, while others are ready to buy. And you have worked with several companies that have generated massive numbers of sales opportunities, and you have probably seen it all. What is one thing that separates a good lead from a great lead?
Yeah, I think it comes back to what I just said, and then I'll build off that a little bit. And I think a good lead is somebody who's open to a meeting. A great lead is somebody who's excited for a meeting. And to build off of that means that some level of discussion and not discovery, but it's a little bit in that pre-call, because you don't want to go too far, has taken place, where that prospect has opened up, where that prospect has talked about some of the issues that they might have had, and that we've tied our client's solution to those issues in their mind, so that they are not just open to the meeting, they're excited for the meeting, they're anticipating the meeting, they think that this meeting could help them solve a problem that is very relevant in their mind.
Right. No, I agree. And bringing back in today's scenario, I'm just detouring a little bit. What is the maximum number of follow-ups a sales guy should do? Because we understand from the prospecting, it might move into a hot lead or it might go cold. So what would David recommend that hey, these are the like 4 follow-ups, 5 follow-ups are good before you call it a dead end. So in your recommendation, what would you say?
And so you saying that after somebody cancels, how many follow-ups for a salesperson?
Yeah, that's a scenario.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say, something that is cut and dry by company and by prospect. I think it really depends on a few different factors. So one is, first, how much potential does that lead have, right? If you have a client that could become or possibly become a huge client, and a pain has been identified in that first call, and you can solve that pain, I'd be hard pressed to ever give up on that lead. You just never know, right? Whereas the smaller ones, you've got to you got to at a certain point lay off. The other part is, if there wasn't a real pain that was identified in that initial call, and they're ghosting you, then probably not. It's probably not a great use of your time to spend a whole bunch of time following up, because it probably wasn't a lead to begin with, right? So we don't have necessarily 4 times, 2 times, 10 times. I think that's the art of sales, is really trying to think through what makes sense in a given scenario.
Right. That's a great way to look at it, David. Knowing what to prioritize and can really change the game, because at the end of the day, you are the one who was working on that lead, and you have the real the emotion from that lead, that whether this will buy, not buy, it will move, how slow it will move, because there are too many permutation and combination when it comes to sales and human behavior attached to it.
Yeah.
Perfect. And there are tons of sales advice out there. But let's be real. None of it is good. Some of it is outdated, and some of it is just plain wrong. And some advice get repeated so often that people take it as gospel without questioning it. I would not ask you about what are the greatest sales advice, but probably let's take the other spectrum. What is the worst piece of sales advice you hear all the time?
Yeah, I'd say it's the concept of always be closing. I really think that that's misguided. I think it leads to some of the things we just talked about, where you have cancellations, especially on a cold call. If you're just trying to close somebody without building value, and a lot of times people know when they're being closed, right? And it doesn't feel good, and so I think that the sales process begins with that initial call, that the brand impression begins with that initial call. And if you are just trying to close somebody, you're not building for a relationship. You're not building for a long-term relationship, and you're potentially building for a cancellation. And so I think that sales is at its best is really a relationship. It's personal interaction. And so if you're selling somebody in a sales mindset and that is just so transparent, I think you're doing a disservice to the prospect and to yourself.
Amazing. And that is so true. And I certainly believe it, that it's not about, people do talk about, the sales leaders talk about closures, revenues, they talk about quarterly, 6 month, annually, but at the end of the day, it's about, what we do on day-to-day basis, because that will lead us to monthly, weekly, annually, quarterly. Perfect. All right. Some quick fire questions. So quick fire question is, I'm gonna give up a question to you. Probably the first thing that comes to your mind. You can just say it. It's like a little rapid fire. No overthinking, David. Whatever comes first thing in your mind, you should instinctively answer it. Here we go. What wins deals? Strategy or execution?
Execution every day of the week.
Perfect. Biggest challenge in outbound sales?
Breaking through.
All right, breaking through, you said. Super. One quality that every SDR must have?
Tenacity.
Amazing. The most underrated sales skill?
Curiosity.
Amazing. That got me thinking too. One word that describe a perfect pitch?
To describe then it's not a pitch.
Then it's not a pitch. Amazing. That was a trick question. Right. Objections.
What about objections?
What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear objections?
Understanding.
Right. Sales team of the future: hybrid, remote, or in office?
So not hybrid. Choose one or the other. Choose to be in office or choose to be remote. But the hybrid is the worst of all worlds.
Perfect. Love those answers. It's always great to hear those quick, instinctive take from someone with that level of experience. David, it has been an incredible, insightful conversation. Your expertise in outbound sales, team building, and the wisdom that you spoke about the future of sales strategy have provided so much value to me, as well as I'm sure people who's going to listen to it. It's been absolutely a pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Perfect. That's it for today's episode. I hope you all have enjoyed this conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with your network. Stay tuned for more expert insights on marketing, sales, technology. Until next time, keep innovating. Stay ahead of the curve. I'll see you. Thank you.
We are signing off from this episode of Data Demand, but the journey doesn't end here. Stay tuned to MarTech 360 for more insights and strategies that can help you master the MarTech landscape.